Hey everyone, this is Justin, and welcome to the Genesis Astronomy Podcast. This show focuses primarily on amateur astronomy topics from a biblical worldview. My hope is to encourage listeners to examine their worldview in light of what the Bible teaches, as well as provide practical tips and resources to help anyone interested in exploring amateur astronomy further. Thanks for tuning in. All right, welcome back everybody. Great to be back again for another episode of the Genesis Astronomy Podcast. We're here with episode 4. We had a little bit of a break there, as you might have noticed. I had to take a little bit of time off to get through some COVID fun, so November was not the most fun month in our house, but back at it, feeling a lot better. On our last episode, we started an overview for those interested in getting started with amateur astronomy or stargazing. We touched a little bit on some basic things like different equipment options to start with, as well as finding a good night to go out and view the night sky. In that vein, we talked a little bit about light pollution and weather as well. So originally, I had actually planned to discuss the lunar eclipse a little bit in this episode, which would have originally been ahead of the event, but obviously that didn't happen. So for those of you that were able to observe it back on November 19th, I hope that you enjoyed it. It was an almost complete lunar eclipse, except for there was just a little sliver, from what I understand, at the kind of the bottom, maybe it was the bottom left, that was not covered. Unfortunately, I did get up briefly to try to see it here, but it was cloudy here in Ohio. So there is actually another one coming up next May, I believe, and that one's supposed to be a total eclipse, so the moon completely covered. I think it's also supposed to begin a little bit earlier so that people don't have to get up, potentially in the middle of the night to try to view it. But, you can just stay up a little bit late. It can be a late night. I don't know, to me that's a little bit easier. The other thing I want to mention, kind of in current astronomy news, if you will, some of you may have already heard of it or maybe reading about it and may have more information than me. But there is a comet that is currently approaching the sun called Comet Leonard. It's slowly becoming a little bit brighter. It's not naked eye bright yet, but there is the possibility of that happening. I was just kind of perusing through an article that was projecting that Comet Leonard could reach about 4th magnitude, which for a star would be visible to the naked eye, but comets are a little bit diffuse, so it sounds like it may be a more binocular-friendly object. But I believe it's December 12th is the closest pass to Earth for Comet Leonard, and then on December 18th, it's supposed to have a pretty close pass with Venus. So December 18th, if it's that evening, if it's clear out where you are, I would recommend getting a pair of binoculars, getting out there and kind of scanning near Venus, because it might be close enough you might be able to catch it. So that would be potentially an ideal time to try to find something that's a little bit faint like that. That's moving through the sky. So there's kind of a current astronomy news update. And of course, there's lots of other things going on, but I wanted to at least get into those couple of things on this episode. All right, so today I would like to move forward a little bit. We can always revisit some of the stuff we talked about last episode and dive into deeper detail on some of the equipment recommendations and those sorts of things at a later time. But what I want to talk about today is, what should you actually look for? And what kind of expectations should you have? Now, this is not intended as discouragement by any means, but we do have to have realistic expectations of the type of things we're going to see when we're observing. For example, if you are used to seeing Hubble telescope quality images, you're going to have to temper your expectations a little bit. Also, understand that professional, even amateur astrophotos are going to generally be long exposure and or several images stacked to bring out colors and details clearly. So looking at the same things in real time in your telescope is likely going to be a significantly different view, especially for faint deep sky objects. A little recommendation I'd actually throw out there, if you don't have a telescope, you've never used a telescope, I would recommend actually trying to attend some kind of star party locally, near you, whether it's at, an observatory nearby that has an astronomy club, or even a more informal one, or somebody that does, you know, maybe before you get into it, give it a shot that way, or go where you can kind of get an idea of what you might expect. Although if you're at an observatory, and they have an observatory telescope that they're opening up for the public to observe a little bit through, those tend to be pretty good quality and expensive telescopes as well, but they'll give you more of an idea of kind of what you're going to see and what kind of expectations you can have for when you get your own telescope. So something to keep in mind. So looking at some of these same things real time in your own telescope is not going to be the same as those Hubble images. Obviously, it's not going to be the same as those even amateur photos that have been taken and put together. So what should you look at then? Well, it really depends on the weather conditions. If you consulted an astronomy weather forecast app, such as the Clear Dark Sky one I referred to on our last episode, then you can get an idea of what you're seeing and transparency forecasts are. And if both look good, I would say you can target whatever you want. If only seeing looks good, then maybe stick to the moon, planets, and maybe bright globular star clusters, open star clusters, those kind of things. Transparency tends not to affect those quite as much. If only transparency is good, however, I would flip that. I would go for some of the more faint deep sky objects primarily, because some of those objects they're actually not really affected by seeing, which can seem a little bit strange. But I can, from experience, I can kind of attest to that. When seeing is bad, if I try to look at Jupiter, it looks like it's under ripply water surface almost. It's not fun. You can't really make out any details. You can make out the disk, and at low magnification you can maybe just barely make out the two main cloud bands that really stand out in contrast to the brighter background clouds. And but even that, the details kind of ripply. And so, but point it at the Andromeda Galaxy, and you don't really, because it's so much fainter and you're not picking up some of that high resolution detail. It's really not an issue. So some examples of things to see right now. So planets, if we talk about planets, Jupiter and Saturn are both pretty visible at night, kind of earlier, after sunset and for a little while. They are moving westward toward the sun, so they're both currently located right around the constellation Capricornus in the southern sky. So if you've got an app on your phone or star maps or anything like that, I would consult those to kind of see where that's at. I recommend Starry Night software. I've also heard recommended Stellarium, are great software for pulling up some of those up-to-date current star maps and being able to see where stuff is at, to kind of help you, if you're not at a point where you can go outside and say, hey, that bright looking star thing over there, I'm pretty sure that's Jupiter, because you'll get used to it. You'll get used to kind of the brightness and just how they look when you see some of the brighter planets. And really, Jupiter's easy to find naked eye because it's easily the brightest star looking object in the southwest after Venus is set. Now Venus is the brightest, and you'll easily be able to see that, and you'll easily be able to find that shortly after sunset right now, and you can check that out. Jupiter's more interesting in my opinion to look at, but you can do Venus if you want to. And so as it gets darker, Venus will set, and then a little further east of that, but in the southwest still, Jupiter kind of really becomes that brightest object in the sky, at least in that area. And then you've got Saturn, which is a little bit fainter, but it's still naked eye visible, and it's really still one of the brighter objects in its area. But you'll kind of find it a little bit to the southwest of Jupiter, roughly maybe about 15 degrees or so. And 15 degrees of sky, an easy way to measure that is to extend your arm out in front of you, kind of point it towards the sky, and extend your pinky finger and your index finger, and roughly the amount of sky between those two fingers is pretty close to about 15 degrees. Other planets, Uranus, Neptune, they're also up right now. definitely more difficult to find than Jupiter and Saturn. Both are a lot fainter. I don't think you can even get Neptune with the naked eye. You might be able to do Uranus, but it's kind of on the toward the edge of possibility, and it might not stand out enough against other stars to really easily pick it out. And so you might have to kind of, get your telescope and start scanning the area. So right now Uranus appears in the constellation of Aries, and Neptune is a little bit west of that in the constellation Aquarius. So again, star maps, great thing to consult to help you find some of the more specific location of these constellations right now and where the planets are in them right now. Because some of these constellations are big, and if I say, such and such planet is in constellation this, well, there's a lot of area within that constellation that the planet could be, especially if it's more faint. Now, if it's Jupiter, it's not going to be hard to find because it's typically going to outshine most of the stars in most of the constellations. So Jupiter's easier, Saturn maybe not as much, and then Uranus and Neptune obviously, not. And Mars when it is around is usually not too bad. So if we start to talk about fainter objects, I really like the Ring Nebula, which is currently sinking westward and becoming a little bit more difficult. You might have a small window, shortly after it gets completely dark to find it. It's in the constellation, so it's in the constellation Lyra. To find Lyra, you might need an app or a star map, or some software. It's a pretty small constellation. It does have the brightest star of the summer sky in it. It's called Vega. So if you're able to find that, you might have an easier time finding the Ring Nebula within that. Another object, Messier 13, which is also known as the Hercules cluster. That's one of my favorites, and I think it's one of the favorites of a lot of people as far as star clusters go, because it's very easy to see, and you can really get zoomed in with a telescope and get some detail on the just thousands of stars in it. Right now, it is a bit low in the west after sunset, and so it's becoming increasingly difficult to view really very well until we get to spring. So that might not be a big option right now. And with that mention of Messier 13, I want to also recommend that as you kind of start to get the hang of things, I would consider tackling the Messier list, which is a list of about 110 objects, I believe, if I recall correctly. Some are very, very easy to find, and some are really difficult. I had actually, years ago, I had started a spreadsheet, tracking, okay, I found this one, here's the list of all of them. I found this one and that one and this one. I've observed, each one of these, and I don't remember how, I got a good ways into it. I got at least probably a quarter of the way into it, maybe a little bit more, and got some difficult ones at times, but it's a fun little challenge, I think, to do. I don't know if it really exists as a real challenge, but I would throw that out there to anybody who's interested in taking that up. Now, to continue on from there, one of the easier objects in the Messier list to find is M31, Messier 31, and that's the Andromeda Galaxy. Right now, early nights, it's visible high in the northeastern sky. It's really getting close to being directly overhead, actually, which, at least for a lot of telescopes, as I understand, gets close to some of their blind spots, which is unfortunate, but really Andromeda sometimes is better viewed with binoculars, in my opinion. So this galaxy is, as you might think, in the constellation Andromeda, and it's right next to the constellation Pegasus. And so if you can find what's called the Great Square of Pegasus, you are close to the galaxy. And it's kind of hard to describe how to find it from there purely in words, so I would recommend a star map on this one. Same also with Messier 33, which is the Triangulum Galaxy. That one's a little bit harder to find, but it's not far from Andromeda. It's just a little bit lower in the sky, and I've found that there's sort of a curve, a slight curve of some stars near the Andromeda Galaxy that you can almost extend the curve of that line that goes through those stars and get down to where the Triangulum Galaxy is at. So it's it's more difficult than the Andromeda Galaxy to find. It's fainter. It is a face-on galaxy, and so if you can get a good view of it, it's pretty neat. Another object, the Double Cluster, which is near the constellation Cassiopeia, which is a constellation that's in the northeast right now. at night, it kind of looks like a slightly flattened W. And this item is a neat contrast of two open star clusters, one that has mostly red and the other has mostly blue stars. Conventional astronomy would say, oh, one group of stars is much younger, one group of stars is much older. Maybe there is some difference in that, although there's a lot of debate, perhaps among creationists, about whether stars really are born or whether they were all created in the beginning when Yahweh, when God created the heavens and the earth. So something interesting to think about. But this is a really cool contrast, I think, in colors. And these two clusters you can see next to each other. You can see them a little bit naked eye, actually, just below, kind of almost straight below the W of Cassiopeia. And if you get binoculars on them, they'll look even better. If you get even just a low power wide field telescope lens on them, it's a pretty neat view. Another object, if we start to look at double and multiple star systems, which can be really cool. There's something, to me, there's something just kind of neat about double stars or multiple stars, because they're stars that are really, really close, and they appear really close through a telescope or through binoculars or whatever object you're using to view them. So one of those that I really like is the double star Albireo in Cygnus the Swan, which is at the very tip of the beak of the swan. And this is also sinking to the west right now, unfortunately. This is definitely a better summer object. This one is kind of a cool blue star. That's one of the stars, and then the other one's orange. And so the color contrast between the blue and the orange is really, really, really neat. Something that is visible in the northern sky in the Big Dipper is the Mizar Alcor multi-star system. I want to say that's like a 6-star. It might be more than that. I can't recall for sure. System. And so if you look at the Big Dipper and you look at the handle of the Big Dipper, the second star from the end of that handle looks like one star if you're just looking at it, but if you point a telescope at it, you're going to see several stars. And so that's kind of a neat. I think they're all kind of a white, either like a pale blue or a white color, so not quite the impressive multi-star, double star contrast that you've got in Albireo. And there's another one, and I'll have to look it up because I can't remember it off the top of my head. I just thought of it. Another double star system that I believe there's kind of an orange and a green, which is kind of a neat contrast as well. So, and then the last object that I'll mention for right now is Messier 15, which is a bright globular cluster. It's near the constellation Pegasus. I believe it's just a little bit to the west. That's another object in that Messier list that if you do decide to take the quote-unquote Messier challenge, I would definitely recommend pulling that in. That's fairly easy to get to, as long as you can get to Pegasus and just kind of head, I think it's a little bit west of Pegasus. So once again, I really highly recommend getting some star map software or an app for your phone. There's a lot of good ones out there, really there are. Oftentimes when you purchase a new telescope, they'll actually come with a free copy of Starry Night or Stellarium or something like that, and so that's really nice too. So I recommend really, really take some time, if you can get one of those pieces of software, take some time to really learn the constellations and kind of what they look like on the software or on the app versus how they look in real life. You'll start to recognize little groups of stars here and there when you're actually outside looking at the sky. As you spend more time observing, especially through multiple seasons and years, navigation is going to become easier. And you'll start to remember where things are. You'll probably get used to, like I say, if you start out in the summertime, you'll get used to that summer sky and you'll get more familiar, especially if you go out, several times, at least like a few times a month, and no pressure, obviously. It's this is a recreational thing to do, but you can put in the effort that you want to put in to be able to learn the navigation. But you will learn that summer sky, especially if you spend enough time out there, kind of bouncing between your star map a little bit and and looking at the sky and starting to learn what things actually look like, to the naked eye. when you're looking at them. And so you'll start to recognize those different groups of stars, and it's really kind of neat as you start to become familiar with that. And of course, as you shift from that summer season, you come into the fall. Obviously, those constellations and that the alignment of the sky starts to shift to west, and you start to see new things come up. And so, if you jump from summer to winter, it's a whole new kind of a whole new sky to learn during that time, which is really neat. And it just, it again, goes back to Genesis 1, when it talks about the fact that, the sun, moon, and stars, they were all made, for times, for seasons to, distinguish between day and night and to do all these different things. And there's an example of how we see that happening. You see different constellations in different seasons, and you start to get a feel for what's in the sky and where it's at in the sky during what times of year. And you can very easily tell what season it is at nighttime by looking up the sky. Now, obviously, you kind of have to know how early at night it is or how late at night it is, because a sky alignment at 3 a.m. during one time of year may be similar to a sky alignment at 10 p.m. a totally different time of year. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. But it's a lot of fun. One other thing that you got to keep in mind is the planets obviously are constantly moving through the constellation, so they don't obviously stick in the same constellation all the time. Thankfully, the deep sky objects tend to stay in place and not move very much at all, not noticeably. I mean, for the Andromeda Galaxy, I've been able to find find it using the same method for years, and it's there. So, thankfully, not all of that stuff is moving around like the planets do. So there you go. This has really just been kind of an introduction to the many, many wonders of the night sky that you can go out and that you can hunt down, that you can find, that you can observe. I mean, I can't even say I really did more than maybe slightly scratch the surface of what's out there. I recommend getting some different astronomy books, especially ones that maybe have some pictures of some of these different things, because it's really neat to see kind of what some of these things look like and have an idea, and then go and see them in real time in your telescope. It just, to me, it adds a little bit of interest. But I hope what I've given you here today on today's episode gives you enough to at least kind of get started and get your feet wet. And I can tell you, the more you get into this, the more you will realize that the heavens really do declare the glory of God. I hope you all enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.